This is a podcast about new crops. You're going to love it. Join us on The Cutting Edge, a podcast in search of new crops for Wisconsin.
Cargill is very, very dedicated to making sure that we can process and utilize these products in a way that's beneficial and brings value back to the farmer. When it comes to other places in the supply chain, that's where other folks, I think, have the opportunity to step up, whether you're a co-op, a seed breeder, you handle grain in Wisconsin, you are an input company, right? There's opportunity for those folks to get involved and support the crop in its development that allows them to do what they're good at and allows us to do what we're good at.
Well, welcome to another episode of the Cutting Edge Podcast. I'm Stefan Mirsky with UW Extension's Emerging Crops program. Today, we're going to be talking about winter camelina. We did a couple of episodes on winter camelina about 2 years ago, and we're excited to hear some updates from our guests today. So we've got several guests from UW Extension today, including Will Fulwider. Hey, Will.
Hey, Stefan.
And Will is going to be help me co-host, but also be a guest on the show. And then Anastasia Kurth and Sam Bibby, also from Extension. And we also have Anna Teeter from Cargill joining us. So thank you to all of them for making the time. And let's just start out by having each of them take a moment to introduce themselves and share their connections with winter camelina. So Sam, do you want to kick us off?
Sure, Stefan. My name is Sam Bibby. Work for UW Extension. I cover La Crosse, Vernon, and Crawford counties as a regional crops educator. And I've been working with Will and Anastasia on some research on farm across the state, all around camelina. And then we have also been growing winter camelina on our farm to harvest for seed. And then we plant it again as a cover crop. And we've been doing that for about 3 years.
Cool. Anastasia, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Stefan, for having us today. I'm Anastasia Kurth. I'm the Regional Crops and Soils Educator covering Sauk, Juneau, and Richland counties with Extension. I've been working with Camelina since 2022. My first experience with the crop was in North Dakota when I was in grad school. So I was very excited to continue working with the crop when I started my job with Extension. So I'm working with Sam and Will on Camelina in Wisconsin.
Awesome. Thanks, Anastasia. And Anna.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me today. My name is Anna Teeter. I'm the Novel Oilseeds Program Manager with Cargill, which basically means get these novel crops on the ground and get growers growing it. Based out of the Twin Cities, but cover a 5-state area, Dakotas, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Iowa. So I'm excited to talk to y'all today.
Glad to have you here, Anna. Will, do you want to introduce yourself real quick too?
Sure. Moonlighting as co-host of The Cutting Edge. My name is Will Fulwider, Regional Crops Educator with Dane and Dodge County Extension. Been working with Camelina with this crew of individuals for a while now. Excited to talk about it today and be a co-host as well. My favorite activity.
All right. Well, before we dive into the questions, I just want to give a little bit of background on what winter camelina is. In a nutshell, so winter camelina is a brassica in the mustard family, similar to canola. The seeds have a high oil content, about 35 to 40%. The oil is used in a variety of products. It's edible for human consumption, sometimes used as skincare products, pet food, livestock feed. But the main market driver right now for the expansion of winter camelina is sustainable aviation fuel. And we're going to go into quite a bit of depth about that. It is a winter annual crop, so in the upper Midwest here, it's typically seeded in September or October and terminated in the spring. You can grow it just as a cover crop, or you can leave it to go to seed and harvest it as a cash crop in late June to early July. And because it's a winter annual, It does fit into some of our conventional crop rotations here. It has a variety of economic and environmental benefits too, which we're going to talk about when we discuss some of the research going on at UW. So environmentally, it has potential benefits related to nutrient leaching, soil erosion, being a source for pollen in early spring for some of our pollinators, and then feeding the soil microbes by keeping living roots in the soil throughout the shoulder seasons. So we will talk about all those things a lot more, but that's winter camelina in a nutshell. And I'll pass it off to Will to ask our first question.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is we're not looking at it specifically, but there are other folks, especially the other folks in Wisconsin, that are looking at it actually as livestock feed as well, beyond the oil and the meal, feeding it as a kind of insider fresh crop to livestock. So not something that we'll cover now, but there is research ongoing about that aspect of it as well. But so we've got all these things going on with it. There's lots of potential avenues that we can go down with winter camelina. We're going to try and go down some today and not take up 14 hours like we easily could talking about this wonderful, wonderful crop. But Anna, I want to focus on you for a second and kick it off with this question of why is it so hot right now? Why is everyone wanting to talk about winter camelina?
I think that's the $1 million question. What brings a new crop to market, right? Um, it starts from a couple of different points. I think the most important one being long term, we have a significant demand for vegetable oil going into biofuels. So by 2040, we're expected to double our biofuels use, both through renewable diesel and SAF. But there's a lot of concern around how we do that. And we are not necessarily growing more ag land, particularly in North America. Now there's concerns about what might happen in South America. And so how can we meet that demand without creating detrimental results to our environment and vulnerable landscapes, we'll say. And one of the ways we can do that is something like Camelina. So very similar to how they double crop wheat and soy down south, we're bringing that practice to other regions where there are open acres available and increasing our available oil production by up to 50% per acre. It's really pretty simple once you think about it in that how do we get more oil per acre and meet that demand?
Awesome. Sam and Anastasia, you all slash me, we are working on this as a cover crop mostly. Why is a cover crop is it of interest right now with farmers in Wisconsin and across the upper Midwest?
Yeah, I think the interest in it as a cover crop is because it's a broadleaf that overwinters and we can plant it late, like after soybeans. So it fits in the same niche as rye, except that it's a broadleaf and it's winter hardy. So that means that we can put winter camelina in as a cover crop after soybeans. It'll overwinter, provide some of those benefits Stefan talked about, and then we'll have a broadleaf that is going into a corn crop, which in our opinion is better than rye going into a corn crop because rye is a grass and so is corn. So we get some disease carryover there, such as pythium, and camelina has a lower carbon to nitrogen ratio. So that means any nitrates that it scavenged or kept out of our groundwater, they're going to turn over quicker and be available to the corn sooner as compared to rye.
All right, so to ground ourselves in the current situation with winter camelina right now, to what extent is winter camelina being grown in Wisconsin today, both as a cover crop and an oilseed? So maybe Anna, you can talk about the oilseed side of it.
Yeah. Absolutely. I'd love to talk about kind of the distribution. So we've seen this crop grown all the way from Wisconsin to Montana, Saskatchewan down to Nebraska, we'll say. So it's had a lot of coverage across the upper Midwest. Where it's been grown primarily today has been North Dakota and Minnesota, because that's where a lot of the efforts, both from a state and policy perspective, as well as where our crush plant is located in West Fargo, North Dakota. So proximity to the crush plant is always a useful tool to have. But we've seen it all the way into Wisconsin, and I think this year might be our first year of some actual commercial oilseed being grown in Wisconsin, which is super exciting. But it's had a lot more acres as a cover crop, which I'd love to let the Wisconsin crew talk about.
So we are seeing quite a bit of cover crop use in Wisconsin. It is growing. Like Anna said, there are some acreage being cropped for oilseed. However, cover crops is where we're starting in the state because it is such a new crop. We don't want farmers to jump all in on something that they're not familiar with. So we've seen Camelina being used in different mixes so far. With our work, we've kind of pushed farmers to grow it as more of a monocrop cover crop situation. I know there's a couple producers that are growing it for their own cover crop seed. I'm sure Sam will dive into that a little bit. We do have a farmer in Dane County that's doing the same thing. So we're excited to look at it as a cover crop and then expand to that oil seed potential here in Wisconsin.
Great. And then kind of what do we're treating it mostly as a cover crop, like you mentioned here in Wisconsin. Some people are starting, like Anna mentioned, to grow it as an oilseed. What are some of the barriers that we're seeing to adoption? We typically think of cereal rye as our main cover crop in a lot of our rotations here in the state, but like why aren't farmers more adopting of winter camelina?
Sure. So I think that's, hitting on that point. If it's something different, it's something new. There's not a lot of research out there, which is something we're obviously trying to fix. And there are some challenges with the crop, getting it established in the fall. If we've run into issues where if there's no moisture, that can slow up the crop. And sometimes farmers are, if they see a failure once, they're hesitant to try it again. So that can be a challenge as well. One thing that we've run into is herbicide carryover issues. So that's been an issue for some farmers that are, not really paying attention to their herbicide program. And Camelina is very sensitive to certain herbicide chemistries. So that can cause crop failure, as well as the seed integrity. So if you're planting variety not stated seed, that can not have the potential to not overwinter. So that can cause crop failure as well.
All right, so one of the things that is obviously pretty important for any potential farmer to understand is how are we going about growing this crop? Can you, Anna, take us through a bit of when you're working with new farmers on this, what is the advice that you give all the way from planting through harvest and like, your elevator pitch of growing practices?
Great. I'll try my best to sum down 3 years worth of experience into a couple minutes and see how I do. We'll want to note that there is opportunity to tweak recommendations at every step, just like there is with every crop. But from a broad-based perspective, typically we're planting in that September to October timeframe. Recommendation is usually to drill, but you can broadcast somewhere between 6 and 10 pounds. Most folks are shooting for 8 pounds to the acre. At that point, most producers are going to get that crop established. It's going to start growing up into the winter. It's going to go to sleep, and then it's going to wake up. And around the same time that you would fertilize some of your winter cereals, you would want to fertilize your camelina in the spring right before bolting. And that depends year by year kind of when that is. Typically, we're looking for about 50 units of actual N. Most folks are putting down, say, 100 pounds of urea. There are other folks that tweak that depending on their soil test results. And then in terms of in-season herbicide, really your only option is grass herbicide. So say like a clethodim or a post. That's generally why we avoid putting it on winter cereals if we can. From there, we get into maybe a little bit more complicated option menu to prepare for harvest. Most folks are going to straight cut it with no other preparation in a year where we have normal weather patterns. It dries out, it gets hot, the grain is starting to naturally dry down. Last year was not one of those years, and this is where we get into, okay, so what do we do? What is our just in case? Some folks will swath it. And that has worked really, really well to help get a really nice, even and dry material going into the combine. Other folks are more interested in desiccating it, especially if they're going to relay with soybeans. Then it's a weed control pass on top of that. So that's some of the decision factors. But both options are acceptable. Really, however you harvest your small grains or your soybeans is the type of setup that you want to use at the front of the combine. So draper head, flex head, any of those things. And then getting it into the combine, generally speaking, is not the hard part. It's getting it cleaned in the combine at the end, that is. So depending on what color you drive does make a difference. Some have easier times than others, and sometimes we get beautiful clean samples, and sometimes they're really, really dirty. This is when I talk to growers and say, okay, what are our options here? How do we get good quality grain going into the bin? I start with, well, you could do some combine modification. A lot of folks are putting some sort of screen on their top sieve to get the majority of that chaff out and blown out the back, and making sure that you're getting that grain to recirculate as much as you can to catch that seed and get it separated from the hull. Some folks want to take it really dirty and then screen it with, say, like a quick clean or a rotary cleaner, something like that. So they're not losing anything out the back of the combine. I think more farmers are surprised about how much loss there can be if they're not well set up than they're expecting, and so that can be a disappointment. So that is an option as well. And then there's, of course, risking it and not checking it and sending it to the crush plant full of pods and getting rejected. And I don't think anybody wants to do that. So I don't recommend starting there. But we have a lot of growers that we can provide recommendations on things that have worked. We get you connected, and talk to your equipment manufacturers. Encourage them to start learning about this crop. We can't do everything. We need their help as well. And, maybe this is a great opportunity for Sam to talk about what's worked for him on his farm and maybe some of the issues or struggles that he's had as well.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. We have planted it and harvested it. Well, I guess we've planted it for seed a couple years now. We've only harvested it once. And then obviously we'll harvest it again this summer. But the first year we planted it for seed, we just did not get the stand we were looking for. We were essentially using, a conventional drill, not no-till drill into soybean stubble, and did not have enough seed to soil contact with that Camelina seed to make a decent stand. So the second year we grew Camelina, we did a little bit of light tillage with a disc, buried some of that residue, got a pretty nice stand. We seeded at 8 pounds the acre, or maybe 10, somewhere in there. The challenge is that the seed is really, really small. Okay, so it's like alfalfa, essentially, like uncoated alfalfa. So very small. And so it's hard to set a drill for it just right, but it's totally doable. We seeded our stuff, I think every year it's been like within the first week of October. And that seems to work pretty decent for us. When we've then in the following spring, we have mostly just, I guess, last year we did not put any nitrogen down, meant to, but did not get there. This spring, however, we did, we streamed on about 50 pounds worth of N from 29% urea, or UAN, I should say. So that went on this spring. I did mention before that we had, this past fall, we had seeded our Camelina onto what was rye ground. So we had harvested rye for grain and then seeded our Camelina there. Well, we had quite a bit. So we did do quite real conventional tillage for that seeding. However, we still had a whole bunch of volunteer rye this spring. And it was a nice early spring. The Camelina got going right away. Just started to bolt pretty soon, which was too bad because the labels for products with clethodim, like section 3, is it, and volunteer maybe, they have Camelina on the label, but you have to spray before Camelina bolts. And so we got behind on that. I mean, it just took off so fast in the spring. We did not have time. Should have been scouting sooner, but what it boils down to is we have a fair bit of volunteer rye in, I'd say, a third of our field, maybe. We're just going to let it go, see what happens. We're going to end up cleaning all the seed anyway. So if we have some rye in our Camelina, we will just clean it out. Seed size is so different, that'll be a breeze. But as far as combining goes, we did have pretty decent success last year. As Anna mentioned, it was a really late season. So we initially combined what was certainly too early. We're just kind of learning as we go, but it was like over 20% moisture. So that was no good. We were able to save that seed. We just moved it quite a few times and put some air on it, and it seems to be fine, and the germ is still good. So we're all right. But we did learn that lesson kind of the hard way. Otherwise, the combine settings, we just do all of our same small grain stuff. So it's got slotted grates in it. It's got the small wire concaves. We just close the sieve all the way down, both sieves. And then I think the fan was like around 700, and we're running a Case IH 1666. And that seemed to work pretty good. It is a small seed, so you can totally blow it out the back, but air can be used to separate it because it is heavy for its size. So it's totally possible to get a good clean product with kind of a stock combine, at least in our circumstance, if you're willing to make an effort. Otherwise, we put it through our grain cleaner because we're going to seed it again as a cover crop, and it gets very, very clean doing that with no trouble at all. So that's kind of my experience, I guess.
One thing I'll note for the guys who want to hold back seed, just so I don't forget, is if you do desiccate with Roundup, you risk your germ. So don't keep that because you don't want to be disappointed. I will also note that Joel is a publicly available variety, so you can technically hold that back. But again, always test your germ. Folks have been disappointed with the germ in some of their harvests, so you don't want to rely on that necessarily. And with the new varieties that come out, that may not be the case to be able to hold it back year after year. So just wanted to throw that little tidbit out there for those of you considering using it as a cover crop or wanting to switch between.
Great. So one of the great things about winter camelina is that it can fit into some of our conventional crop rotations. Can you describe what some of those crop rotations might be for growers who are interested in incorporating winter camelina, both as a cover crop and an oilseed crop?
For sure. So Camelina is great behind soybeans because there's a little residue, which makes seeding easier. And so if you're looking for a cover crop, we think it works pretty good there. Some considerations, like Anastasia mentioned, was the herbicide carryover. We have potential issues with groups 2, 5, 14, 15, and 27. Luckily, we are doing some work on that. So hopefully we have some more clear-cut answers in the future. But the residue is really one of the bigger issues. So soybeans, great. After silage corn, also really great. Unfortunately, after grain corn, it is probably getting on the late side to seed Camelina, and we have a ton of residue. So those are not ideal. After a small grain is pretty good. There are maybe some herbicide carryover concerns, but maybe less than soybeans. However, we do have to watch the volunteer rye or winter wheat, perhaps, and consider either spraying that out in the fall or maybe just the early spring. But those are some rotations and some possible issues or things to watch out for.
Can you kind of thinking about it rotationally, like you were saying, is there a circumstance you can plant it too early? Like if I go in right after I've harvested my wheat and I plant it August 3rd, is that too early? Well, what's going to happen?
I think that depends on your goals, Will. If you were to plant too early, such as mid-August, we had plenty of moisture, your Camelina might even go to seed. But that's not what we want, right? We want an overwintering cover crop. So you're right. If we plant, generally we say in Central Wisconsin, somewhere between, if you plant before September 15th, you're probably on the riskier side of too early. So when that happens, when we plant too early, what happens is the camelina will bolt, which means it's growing up really quickly and it's trying to put flowers out so it can go to seed. And that makes it very vulnerable to winter kill, and kind of guarantees winter kill, right? We want that camelina to stay in a rosette form, and then it will make it through the winter. So we generally say that September 15th to October 15th, that window is pretty ideal.
Yeah, and then Anna, any thoughts on rotations when you're growing it as a seed crop?
Absolutely. So, you can be a little bit more forgiving if you're growing it as a cover crop and you do want to put it in August. I guess that's like Sam said, your goal is your goal. But growing it as an oil seed, you definitely want to pay attention to those recommendations and make sure you are following those, or you might end up disappointed the next spring. And so the rotations that I've seen work really well. Going behind small grains is a really great fit. Generally, there's as long as your drill is sharp and can get down into that soil layer, you can get a beautiful stand of no-till camelina into wheat or small grain stubble. Behind soybeans can work. It's convenient, not necessarily the ideal rotation. We're seeing a lot of excitement, though, out of folks who have vegetable crops. So sweet corn, green beans, potatoes, edible beans, all of those have potential to be before, or not all of them, but most of them have potential to be before or after, which is really exciting. Um, Silage works. We've also had some folks experimenting with it with or behind flax or dry peas when we start getting out west. So there's a lot of opportunity. I think the most challenging acre is going to be your really tight corn and soybean rotation acres, and we're already having growers prove that they can manage even in that system. Just takes learning and some experimentation, but we're seeing some good success even there, which is very exciting because that has the biggest acre potential, and that's what we need.
And so you've mentioned a couple of these like wide geographies out west here in Wisconsin, very different like climatic areas. And so one thing is this is, one crop that we're trying to plant in all these different areas. You mentioned the canning crops. I think of that Wisconsin's central sands, very different than down here in southern Wisconsin. We're dealing more like with some of our silt loams and clay loams, et cetera. What we didn't really talk about this thing, so I kind of want to hit on it is like Camelina as being able to deal with these different climate zones. You need to plant it at different times to take advantage of rains. Is it drought hardy? What is it?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in more in depth on what we've seen work and what we've seen that hasn't. The biggest consideration is going to be how heavy your soil type is. So if you have really consistent ponding or very, very wet, heavy soils, Camelina will likely struggle either because of drowning in spring rains or perhaps ice sheeting over the winter. So those tend to be the fields that we avoid on first glance, although we produce camelina up in Roseau County, Minnesota, which is wild rice country. It's basically a swamp. And it grows beautifully up there, but they have, pretty extensive sets of drainage, right? So we're really managing that moisture over the winter and the spring, and it's not always a guaranteed outcome because they have wet seasons too. I find it establishes quite nicely on most soil types. It even will do well on sour soils or saline soils out west, which is pretty incredible. There's not a lot you can grow out there. Um, and then for the soils of Wisconsin, I mean, there's very few soils that I would say stay away from in Wisconsin. Again, unless you're ponding, having that really, really wet, heavy clay soils. But even in the Red River Valley and say the Fargo area where there's a heavy soils, they grow beautiful camelina there too. So it's adaptable. You just have to know your soil conditions, and maybe start on some lighter soils to get used to the crop.
Great. Staying here in Wisconsin, kicking it to the UW team a bit, talked a little bit about what it's like as a cover crop. That's kind of been the focus of our research. And so I would love for you all to dive down a little bit into what are we looking at specifically and kind of what have been the findings so far. Anastasia, we'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah. So we're excited to be doing some Camelina research here in Wisconsin with our extension team. We're kind of wrapping up our first major experiment that we've done on farm this year. We received a grant to look at rye versus Camelina as a cover crop. So our main kind of overarching question was, is there a cover crop before corn that can avoid potential pitfalls of a rye cover crop while still delivering the benefits of covered soils and reduced nitrate leaching? So this study we started in 2024. Basically, we have 4 different sites. So one in Vernon County, one in Juneau County, and 2 in Dane County. And in each of these sites, we had a no cover crop control, a drill rye treatment, and this is all after soybean, a Camelina drill treatment, and then also a Camelina drone treatment. So the Camelina drone seeding took place about mid-September each fall into standing soybean that were about 50 to 70% leaf drop. So at these sites, we took various soil tests in the spring, fall, and that pre-side dress nitrate time. We also use this technology called resin accumulators. So these are little devices similar to a hockey puck size that we buried in each of the treatments at our on-farm research sites. And they have a specific resin in them that will collect nitrate that's coming through the soil profile. So we bury them in the fall, and then we dig them up in the spring to see what the nitrate accumulation was under each of our cover crop treatments. So then in the spring, once our cover crop is up, we're taking cover crop biomass and stand counts. And then in the fall, we're looking at corn yield. So did that cover crop impact our corn yield the following fall? So we've had really interesting results with this experiment so far. Our establishment has been kind of, hit or miss based on weather, different field conditions, like we talked about herbicide carryover. But really our main takeaways is that we're seeing really good overwintering from the Joel variety. I mentioned that earlier about seed integrity and how important that is. And our drone seeding, which happens about a month earlier than our drilled treatments, significantly increases our biomass. So if there's enough moisture to get that crop going right away in the fall, we're seeing quite a bit more biomass when it is drilled, or when it is drone seeded compared to drilled. And then when we ran the stats on all of our corn yield figures, we saw no difference in yield between the no cover, the Camelina, and then the rye. So that's good news, I guess. And one thing that we've found from the nitrate leaching is that cover crops are reducing their nitrate leaching. So compared to that no cover, if you have anything out there that's growing as a cover crop, that's going to reduce your nitrate leaching. So that's kind of our initial study, and we have a lot going on in our thought process. We have a lot of different avenues to take off to next. But yeah, that's a little bit on our initial start.
Great. And, not being privy at all to this research or being a part of it in the least, I have no idea what we're doing in the future on this study. So, Sam, can you enlighten us a little bit as to the future avenues of this research?
For sure. We are pretty excited because we are partnering with the University of Minnesota's Forever Green program and putting in 2 trials in Wisconsin for herbicide carryover on Camelina. So I believe it is a 17 treatment trial. So that's 17 different herbicide products. And they're going to cover the main modes of action, or I'm sorry, the main active ingredients in groups 2, 5, 14, and 15 that we would use in soybeans. So that's going to be a very well-rounded study that'll give us some straightforward answers about how herbicides that are sprayed on our soybeans in the spring affect Camelina seeded in the fall. And we are pretty stoked about that. On top of that, and I'll just let Anastasia talk about the corn seedling disease research that we've also got going on, if she wants to hop in.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Sam. So like Sam mentioned, we are doing some work in the pathology space in connection with Dr. Damon Smith's lab. I think it was mentioned earlier, the incidence of Pythium, which is a seedling disease, that's present in our grass crops. So if we're going from a rye cover crop to a corn crop, there could be an increased incidence of that seedling disease present. So we are doing some initial research this year in these already established on-farm research sites that we have. We're looking, we already took some soil samples this spring, and we will be taking some more around pre-side dress time, and then also assessing the corn for any signs of disease. So kind of quantifying if Camelina can reduce this incidence of seedling disease in our corn. So we're excited to kind of start that initial research and see where it takes us next.
How long are these research projects? When do you think you might have some data?
Well, for the herbicide carryover bit, we should have some preliminary data this fall. I mean, most of the project should be wrapped up really by this fall. And so this winter, we should have pretty good results. However, one of those plots we are going to actually carry forward to the next spring and take to yield. So that'll mean harvesting the Camelina. So in that case, the total project should wrap up somewhere around July of 27 and, be completely done by about then.
Cool.
And the pathology study is just 1 year for right now. So we should have some initial results by this fall, winter timeframe. And we're hoping to use it to leverage a bigger study in the following years.
And then our kind of baseline study, the on-farm research study that we've been doing since 2024 is also wrapping up this year. So all of the studies are wrapping up. We're going off the rails with our Camelina research. No one knows what's coming next.
I've got some ideas if you need them.
Oh, I know.
Can I throw in a plug for some other exciting research we've had here recently out of both Minnesota and North Dakota that Camelina is a non-host for soybean cyst nematode. And so they're seeing either maintenance or decreasing populations of soybean cyst nematode. And I think a lot of folks are excited about seeing that as an opportunity or a tool to help battle that pest, which is a really significant soybean problem, definitely in the I-states and in southern Wisconsin. So other really great research that I'm excited to see get utilized in the real world.
Cool. Well, I think we can transition into some of our questions related to the industry and commercialization side of things. So, yeah, Anna, you're kind of spearheading this. Can you just kind of like briefly explain the steps between harvesting winter camelina seed on the farm to the production of sustainable aviation fuel? What are each of those steps that have to happen?
Absolutely. You're going to put the industry person in the hot seat, make me answer all the questions. I'm just teasing. Yeah, it is a lengthy process to get from, initial step to final product. And I think sometimes we take that for granted in our agricultural system. So I'm really glad we get to describe that for everybody. So assuming that the camelina was planted and harvested, it is then brought to the crush plant. And the West Fargo crush plant is pretty unique because it is a soft seed crush plant, which crushes high oil content seeds. So separate from a soybean crush plant, even though they both produce vegetable oil. So I want to make that clarification. Not all crush plants are created equal. If a soybean crush plant were to crush camelina, there would be some significant infrastructure investment that would need to happen at those plants. Once it is crushed, you now have two byproducts. You have your oil and you have your meal. The meal is then utilized, say, in animal livestock rations or other uses. And then the oil is then refined in our oil refinery and then sold to a fuel refiner. So that is then processed into actual fuel, whether it's renewable diesel or SAF, which have a little bit of a different process between the two of them. And from there, it gets blended. So you can only put 50% of a renewable fuel in, say, an airplane, right? So 50% Camelina fuel and 50% petroleum fuel. And that's how you get takeoff for one of these types of crops. So there's a number of different steps, a number of hands. A lot of folks are all kind of playing a role in the supply chain to make it happen and really move this crop forward.
Great. So, of those different steps that you just mentioned, how many are owned and operated by Cargill?
That's a great question. So we're only a small but important part of that supply chain. Um, and with this pilot work, we're probably more involved than we normally would be. Our normal involvement on most things on the commodity side is buying commodity grain and then processing it and selling it to our customers. So we're really that middle processing transformation step, and that's our wheelhouse. That's where we want to stay. Today, we are providing some seed to our producers. We're trying to really push and help and support agronomy research and in the inputs business, as well as crop breeding and development. And that's in conjunction with the University of Minnesota. But in the long term, our goal is for the rest of the industry to step in and take that role and do that work as they would with corn or soybeans, right? And I tell folks, this is year three of however many years, like soybeans went on 70 years ago, right? And so we have a very similar journey that we have to go on to scale this crop up in a way that makes sense. And somebody needs to step in and really show the support to make it happen. And so that's how we view our role today. Long term, we want all the players in the industry to really own their lane and lift this crop together.
Just so I understand, so Cargill's not the one that's like operating the crush plant or the refinery. You guys are the ones that are kind of coordinating, getting the oil seed, producing the oil seed, working with the farmers, and then getting it to the crush plant. Is that right?
So we do both the grain origination, the buying, the purchasing, and the crushing. So we're two steps of that middle supply chain. So our crush plant in West Fargo is processing the oil seed, refining it into its first round of, say, refined bleach vegetable oil. Then it gets sold to be refined into a fuel to somebody else. So we do have pretty strict start and stops, but it's a pretty darn important part of the process. There's not a lot of soft seed crush plants that can actually handle this. There's only about 3 or 4 other ones in the country that can handle processing this crop successfully. So it's a really important role that we play in this part of the supply chain.
And who are the main buyers? You don't have to say specifically for Cargill, but who is buying the camelina oil?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really important question, right? Market dependency and market demand really justify if a farmer is going to participate in the market. So it makes a ton of sense to ask that question. Generally, you're looking at people who use significant amounts of fuels or who are fuel buyers themselves, right? So oil and gas companies, or say an airline or a heavy off-road machinery company that's say for mining, things like that. Those are the folks that are doing a bulk amount of the purchasing of the refined vegetable oil product to turn it into fuel or to buy the fuel. There's a couple of different options in there. But there's also other buyers right now at a small scale that are outside of that biofuel space, which is good. The more options that we have, the more stable this product will grow with farmers. And so there's been interest for the oil to go into supplements or animal feed, other things in that space, the beauty space, which I know you touched on a little bit earlier, that are helping support us and the farmers as we grow and expand onto more and more acres.
Question about that. Um, and the SAF, the sustainable aviation fuel, it's like the sexy thing that everyone talks about with regards to end product of Camelina. But
Mhm.
is Camelina just really well set up for that as the end product, or is there a reason why the other biofuel potentials that it has are not as highlighted?
Yeah, that gets to be a very complicated question very quickly. So I'll start with there is a number of different potential novel oil seeds or intermediate oil seeds that can play this role, right? That includes pennycress, camelina, carinata, and maybe winter canola. All of these crops, in their appropriate geographies, can fill a gap in the existing rotation, right? That's the ultimate goal, and producing more oil. Camelina specifically is commercially ready today. And what I mean by that is the meal is something that's 65% of the product that comes out of the crush plant, right? It's a lot of product to just throw away if there's nowhere to put it, and it tanks the economics of the crop. Well, something like carinata or pennycress have a little bit higher glucosinolate level, and so they may or may not be ready for commercial sale for livestock feeding, right? They haven't gotten the approvals to feed into a livestock ration. Doesn't mean they won't, they definitely will get there. But Camelina was ready today and allowed us to actually jump really feet first into this pilot. And so I think these other crops will come along and play in this space. But one of the other really important features is the amount of inputs that goes into growing this crop that impacts the CI score, right? So I always use corn as an example. A lot of us are very familiar with it. If you look at the CI score of corn, 50% of it comes from fertilizer, right? Well, when you look at something like camelina, a lot less of it comes from fertilizer. We have a lot less management or passes that we need to do with camelina. And in the right policy, there are land use change benefits given to a two crop system rather than a monocrop system. And that gets really technical really quickly, modeling all of those things. But the important thing to take away is we are producing more bushels or more tons per acre on less inputs. And that improves that CI score and makes all of these novel or intermediate oil seeds really appealing to the demand customers wanting to purchase these fuels, right? So how do they reduce that carbon intensity? They buy fuels that have less inputs that go into them.
Yeah, I was just going to explain for people who don't know what CI is. And you just said it, carbon intensity, and I guess I would explain it as like the amount of greenhouse gas emissions involved in the production of the crop per unit. But is that how you would explain it too?
Yeah, there's the what is it? The kilojoules per gram. Is that the unit of measure? You may have to fact check me on that. But it's basically how much energy intensity or input goes to make 1 gram of fuel, right? So how much does it go in to get what we want out of it? Um, and that's where some of these biofuels, they're improvements over straight petroleum, which is very, very intensive to mine and refine and produce, especially because of the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that are produced with that feedstock in comparison to things like soybeans, corn, canola, or camelina or pennycress, which is an even further improvement from those crops. So it gets really technical and really heavy really quick, but they are important to making the demand and stability really there for the grower to participate with.
Cool. So just kind of to wrap up the supply chain discussion a little bit, I was curious if Cargill is investing in the supply chain to kind of plan for the future growth, and if so, where are you doing that?
Yeah, that's a really important question. And I think it goes back to whose role is it to play where in the supply chain? So, Cargill is very, very dedicated to making sure that we can process and utilize these byproducts in a way that's beneficial and brings value back to the farmer. When it comes to other places in the supply chain, that's where other folks, I think, have the opportunity to step up, whether you're a co-op, a seed breeder, you handle grain in Wisconsin, you are an input company, right? There's opportunity for those folks to get involved and support the crop and its development, that allows them to do what they're good at and allows us to do what we're good at. And that's a really important piece in making sure that there's no, significant overreach into any one spot in the supply chain.
Excellent. Now we're gonna drill down to the grower level a little bit and grower interaction with Cargill, talking about kind of the contracts and the way those work, terms and conditions, et cetera, as much as you are up for talking about it. But how many acres do you all have contracted now?
So in the last 3 years, we've contracted about 12,000 acres and worked with about 100 growers. So we've definitely gotten our fair share of experience on what's worked and what hasn't. Um, And in terms of contracting, I'll dive into, I think, the broad strokes of what a grower could expect. So our goal is for it to be a full production contract, right? So you, Mr. Grower, do not have to worry about marketing only half of the contract to us and then trying to find a home for the rest of it. We take everything that the grower produces so that they don't have to worry about it. And we also crush at the end of August. So that means we are taking that grain off of the farm, probably the first 2 weeks of August, and out of the way before corn and bean harvests really kick off. And that's been a really positive piece of feedback we've gotten from producers. It's that, grain storage is definitely a barrier, but at least it's not on farm with our really main cash crops. But growers do have to, expect to hold on to the grain for 4 to 6 weeks while we wait for that crush to go. So we call that a buyer's call, right? And then we are pricing off of soybean futures because that is the market that this crop is most closely following. And there's not a commodity futures price for Camelina yet. We don't have enough acres to justify that. We have to price it off of something and provide an additional value or premium on top of that to the producer, depending on if they want pickup or delivery off of the farm. Typically, we see pricing from Camelina to, say, a traditional soybean crop when you include basis of a $2 to $3 spread. So it can be appealing for producers depending on their situation, what the cash price of their local elevator might be, and if they're going to do pickup or delivery, but it's enough at least to get growers interested. The other piece that we're working with producers, and Anastasia's touched on it multiple times, is we're providing seed for the first couple of years for producers if they want it, because we've had issues with growers getting VNS seed or seed that they say is winter variety and it's not, and being really disappointed. And so we do offer that as a deduction off the grain settlement, or as one of my farmers called it, interest free, which, if you want to think about it that way, sure. Insurance agent. So one of the things that we're doing is providing a floor for producers, or like a crop insurance type of product that allows producers to protect themselves from major risks growing this crop. And today that looks like a floor on the contract. There may be different iterations of that in the future. But really just trying to help limit risk as much as we can, especially because we're not a crop insurance company. That's not necessarily our lane, but we know that it's needed in these initial couple of years. So those are the big broad brushstrokes of the contract and the flow with Cargill and the farmer. And so far we've had a lot of really positive feedback on the things that we're offering with the contract and the grower engagement we've had.
Cool. So, yeah, looking towards the future a little bit more, what do you think the market for Camelina oil looks like? Can we expect like continued growth, or especially with some of the changing political winds and climate change not being such a priority? Yeah, what does the future look like?
Yeah, that's definitely a hot button topic in terms of policy that influences a lot of what we do. But I'll start with the potential demand. What I like to describe for folks is one tanker truck full of gasoline or renewable diesel. I should say renewable diesel, gasoline's ethanol, but anyway. One of those tanker trucks takes about 150 acres to fill. So it takes a lot of acres to get distilled down into the amount of volume that we need. A small scale project for one of these oil and gas players would be 500,000 acres, right? And that's a teeny tiny drop in the bucket of what they actually need. The harder part is, do we have enough demand and supply to justify those folks working in this space? And that's exactly to the question you're getting at, right? So I think if growers get comfortable with it and we have continued success, I think the supply will be there. It's going to take time and we'll learn, but we'll definitely get there. From the demand side, policy is obviously a big picture of that. But one policy is not necessarily going to make or break this market. And I say that we wouldn't be investing in this space if we were betting on one policy. That's not a very smart strategy for a global company to be doing. And so we are looking at a global portfolio of potential policies to support this crop. Of course, we'd love for it to stay here. But the federal policy has put all crops on the same playing field. And so there's less of an advantage to something like Camelina. But the California Low Carbon Fuel Standard, LCFS, there's an opportunity there. Same potential opportunity up into British Columbia or into Europe. I've had a lot of interest in Asia as well because they're not significant producers of vegetable oil. So there's a really big kind of swirling global picture of policy that's driving what we do. Of course, my favorite thing is for it to stay domestic, for growers to continue to support their domestic energy policies and be profitable. But we also know that we need that assurance globally to keep things as stable as possible for growers, so we're not yo-yoing supply and demand, because that doesn't get us anywhere very quickly if we do that.
Thanks, Anna. That really clears up a lot, kind of where things are headed potentially for winter camelina, some of the potential there, and that's awesome. Starting to think about wrapping things up for today. Are there resources for growers that are interested, both from kind of Cargill and some of the partnerships that you have, and then from the UW side of things, what is it that we have for people that are interested in looking at it as a cover crop, or even as a crop? What are some of the resources we've got? So maybe Anna, we'll start with you, and then we can kick it to Sam and Anastasia.
Great. If you'd asked me that question 3 years ago, I would have told you no, but we've come a very long way in that amount of time. The University of Minnesota Forever Green team put together a grower guide in combination with research from the USDA ARS Morris, NDSU, University of Minnesota, as the Upper Midwest Winter Camelina Growers Guide. It's a fabulous resource. NDSU actually just put out a new resource as well, looking at really closely Marisol Birdie's research on winter camelina. She's kind of the end all be all of camelina researchers in the region. And I know that Dan Smith at the University of Wisconsin has just put together a great resource as well about how to integrate it into corn and soybean rotations from a production standpoint. So those are all really helpful resources that I love to share out with growers. And there's more and more coming out every day. And I know that the university team has put together some other great resources as well.
And a follow up. So if a grower is interested in growing camelina for seed in Wisconsin, how would they find out more about how to do that?
Yeah, so the further into Wisconsin we get, it's a little bit more of a case-by-case basis. Generally, those folks, we're asking them to deliver because it is a little bit further away. But willing to talk to anybody to see if there's room for participation. If they want to reach out, they can obviously go to our website and type in, if you type in Cargill and winter camelina, it's the first website that pops up. There's a form down at the bottom, or actually it's up at the top, that you can fill out. But even if a grower isn't ready to produce it for seed, try it as a cover crop first and get comfortable with it. That's what I tell every grower. If you're not ready to do it as an oilseed today, just get comfortable with it as a cover crop. It's a great cover crop. But if you do want to produce it for oilseed, again, let's talk about where you're located. Say Appleton, Wisconsin may be a bit of a haul from West Fargo, so that may not work in terms of logistics today. Of course, we're hoping to expand with other grain handling capacities, and we ask that growers grow 50 acres, just to make sure that if there's trucks or hauling or anything, we're filling up trucks and trying to be as efficient as possible. If you want to play with it by yourself, I always tell guys, harvest at least 20 acres. That way you have the yield history for RMA. That at least gets you going. And I think that's a great place to start and get comfortable with the crop.
As far as resources from UW-Madison, we have a handful of shorter publications out. I know Anastasia has written a great piece that ended up in Farm Progress, and so that's certainly a good resource. We do expect to have some reports coming out very shortly, at least within the next year. We'll have some great information for farmers on herbicide carryover this fall. And then as we wrap up our SARE partnership grant, that's the kind of big one that got us going. We'll have some research reports that come out related to that as well. That should be great for folks to read and get a little bit more familiar with the Camelina.
I can't tell you how excited I am for that herbicide research.
Yeah. And on top of that, it should be noted that anybody in Wisconsin or nearby that's interested in growing it, they can always reach out to any of Will, Anastasia, or myself as well. We are spread out across the state, at least to a certain extent, and would love to visit with anybody growing Camelina and come out to the field and check it out.
All right. Well, that does it for today. Thank you, Anastasia, Sam, and Anna, and also to you, Will, for co-hosting.
Always here for it.
Thanks for having us.
Brought to you by the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension.